My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask you for pardon of my sins and grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. There is a Greek philosopher from several centuries before Jesus, Aristotle, and he wrote wonderful things about friendship. He wrote wonderful things about many themes, but in particular friendship. He has a special intuition into the nature of friendship. And one of the things he says about friendship, which is a little bit surprising, it's a saying, a Greek saying that he quotes approvingly. He says, "To be a friend to someone, you must eat a peck of salt together." Now, a peck is a measure which is about 8 kilos or 2 gallons, a lot of salt. Now, of course, he doesn't mean that you have to sit down with your friend and start working your way through kilos and kilos of salt. He means, that the saying means that you must have that many meals that a pinch of salt there, a pinch of salt here and there, would eventually get through, you'd eventually get through 8 kilos of salt. So in other words, you have to have a lot of meals together. A lot of meals where you're talking, as you normally do over a meal, exchanging stories, ideas, talking about the weather, about politics, even about COVID, laughing, chatting, all these things. And that, over time, not immediately, but over time, transforms 2 or more persons into literally companions. A companion is another word for a friend, of course, but it's a very useful word because it literally means with bread. It's from the Latin cum panis, with bread. So we become companions by eating together, eating and talking together, obviously. And when we see our Lord in the Gospel, we'll see in a moment today's Gospel, but right throughout the Gospel, we see again and again how you, Jesus, eat with people, all kinds of meals, large numbers of people or small numbers of people, but you're continually at meal or eating, sitting down to meals with different people. And when we think that you came on earth, Lord, to make us your companions, it makes a lot of sense. When we put that together with Aristotle's observation, we really do become companions through these very convivial meals together. And in fact, it does appear that Jesus is very convivial. Everybody wants to have him around for dinner. We see that at the wedding feast at Cana. We see that in the feast thrown by Simon the Pharisee. We see that again, you, Lord, are invited by Martha and Mary to their house for any number of meals, but one in particular is described, the preparations. And then even after the resurrection, those 2 disciples on the way to Emmaus insist that Jesus go into the inn with them, at least for their evening meal. So Jesus is very much appreciated, and we can see also that you, Lord, really appreciate the value and the deeper meaning of these meals together. So much so that you, Lord, when you want us to form a picture of heaven, one of the most striking images that you use for heaven is that of a meal. And not just any old meal, but in a certain sense, the king of all meals. The king of all meals is a wedding meal, a wedding banquet. And you say, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding banquet for his son. So if heaven is this eternal meal, we could ask ourselves, in the presence of Jesus, we could ask ourselves, well, if that's my eternal destiny, an eternal meal, how am I at the meals down here below? Are I convivial? There's a story told by John Paul I in a little book he wrote. He's quoting this story, and a story in which a guy imagines 2 visions, a vision of hell followed by a vision of heaven. And in the vision of hell, he sees into this room. The author might initially already been oriental because it's all about chopsticks and rice. In the vision of hell, the guy sees an immense room with long tables with diners down either side of the table. There are large bowls of lovely cooked rice and gourmet delicacies on the table, and all the diners have attached to their hands long chopsticks, but much longer than your average chopstick. So as they try to eat, this is hell, remember, as they try to eat, they try to bring the rice to their mouths, but the sticks are too long, and so they can never quite get it to their mouths. And so they're all highly frustrated and in hell. Then the following vision is a vision of heaven, but it's the exact same setup. It's the same tables, bowls of rice, gourmet delicacies, and the same kind of diners with the same long chopsticks fastened to their hands. But here everybody's delighted and they're all eating to their heart's content, very simply because in heaven they're good convivial diners and they're sharing the food with one another. In other words, instead of trying to feed themselves, they're bringing the rice over to their companion over the other side of the table. So they're all mutually looking after one another. And that is the exact same setup, but a completely different consequence because the diners are looking after each other. Now, as I promised, we'd get to today's Gospel. Today is the feast of St. Matthew, also known as Levi. And in today's Gospel, he himself tells us the story of his vocation, the moment when Jesus called him to be an apostle. The strange thing being that Matthew was a tax collector, so not the kind of guy you would have suspected that Jesus would call to be an apostle, but it happens. So Matthew describes it like this. He says, as Jesus was walking on, he saw a man named Matthew sitting by the customs house, and he said to him, follow me, and he got up and followed him. While he was at dinner in the house, it happened that a number of tax collectors and sinners came to sit at the table with Jesus and his disciples. Now, Luke fleshes that out. St. Luke in his Gospel fleshes that out a little bit because he actually tells us that Levi, Matthew, threw a great feast for Jesus and his friends. That's essentially what Luke, he kind of gives us a little bit more detail. And when we look at it, we understand very well St. Matthew has just had the most wonderful event in his whole life. This encounter with Jesus, this calling to be an apostle. He wants to celebrate, but not only that, but he wants his colleagues, that are the other tax collectors, also to meet Jesus, to get to know him, to become his companions. And so he throws this meal. Thinking of ourselves in this regard, and our conviviality. Going back to Aristotle, he says, it talks about cattle, cows in the field. He says, they all graze in the same place, but they're not really together. Physically, they're in the one place, but they're not really eating together. You don't talk about convivial cows, they're just eating. Whereas he says that human beings, we share food and share conversation as we eat. But how am I at meals? For example, this may be something that we all have to be careful with, the phone. If you or if I were looking at the phone through the meal, we're in danger of becoming kind of bovine. We might be with the others, but we're not really with them. We're in the same physical place. And so we're a little bit like the cattle grazing in the field. It's just our food and our phone. Whereas the food is really there, and its main kind of context should be the conversation, or should give rise to conversation. And conversation that builds up our companionship with the people that God has chosen to share our dinner table with, our family, our friends, whoever it might be. They're the people that God has called us to spend so many meals together with. So let's finish up asking our Lord, maybe St. Matthew also, Our Lady, for sure Our Lady was tremendously convivial, that we would have that, know the art, know how to be very convivial in our meals and banquets here on earth, so that well, the way we be prepared for us for that eternal banquet in heaven. I give you thanks, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations you have communicated to me in this meditation. I ask you for help to put them into effect. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.